When Elena Rossi stepped into that blizzard with her two children, she thought she'd hit rock bottom. Fired from her job, nowhere to go, watching her 7-year-old daughter turn blue from the cold. But when a mysterious stranger in an expensive coat appeared through the snow like an angel of mercy, she had no idea she was about to enter a world where protection came with a price, where love could be more dangerous than hate, and where saying yes to salvation meant risking everything she'd fought to protect. What Elena didn't know was that the man offering his coat had already buried one family, and the people hunting her were about to discover that some wolves don't just rescue lost lambs, they eliminate anyone who threatens their pack. But in a world where trust is luxury and survival is an art, Elena would soon learn that sometimes the most dangerous choice is also the only one that leads to redemption. Subscribe and tell me where you're watching from, because this story is about to prove that not all fairy tales begin with once upon a time, and the most beautiful love stories sometimes start in the eye of the storm. The fluorescent lights in Tony's diner buzzed and flickered like dying fireflies. Elena Rossi wiped down the same sticky table for the third time, her eyes darting to the clock above the grill. 8:30. The snow outside had been falling since noon, and now it looked like nature was dumping a year's worth of winter in one night. "Mama, can we go home now?" Marco's small voice cut through the clatter of dishes. Her 7-year-old son sat in the back booth with his twin sister, Mia. They both wore coats that had seen better days, hand-me-downs from the church donation box that still carried the faint smell of someone else's life. Elena's heart squeezed tight. Home. If you could call their tiny studio apartment above the laundromat a home. The radiator barely worked, and the landlord had been asking questions about next month's rent. Questions she couldn't answer. "Just a little longer, baby," she whispered, forcing a smile. "Mama needs to finish cleaning up." Mia didn't look up from her coloring book. She hadn't spoken a word since the divorce was finalized 6 months ago. The doctors said it was trauma response. Elena called it heartbreak. Tony emerged from the kitchen, his round face red and sweaty. He untied his grease-stained apron and threw it on the counter with more force than necessary. "Elena, we need to talk." Her stomach dropped. She knew that tone. It was the same one her ex-husband had used before he walked out. The same one the landlord used when he wanted something she couldn't give. "What's wrong?" She set down her cleaning rag, her hand suddenly shaking. "Business is slow, real slow." Tony wouldn't meet her eyes. "I can't afford to keep you on anymore. Tonight's your last shift." The words hit her like a punch to the chest. She stared at him, waiting for him to say he was joking, waiting for the world to make sense again. "But Tony, it's Christmas next month. I have kids. You know I work hard." "I'm sorry, Elena. I really am." He pulled an envelope from his pocket and held it out. "Here's what I owe you, plus a little extra. You're a good worker, but I got bills too." She took the envelope with numb fingers. Even without counting, she knew it wouldn't be enough. It was never enough. "You and the kids need to clear out now," Tony continued, already grabbing his coat. "I'm locking up early because of the storm." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. Outside, the snow was falling harder and the temperature was dropping fast. She thought about their broken heater, about the empty refrigerator, about how Mia's cough had been getting worse. "Tony, please, can we just stay until morning? The storm—" "Sorry, Elena, insurance won't cover anything if you're here after hours." And just like that, he was gone. The bell above the door chimed once as it closed behind him, leaving Elena alone with her children and the weight of impossible choices. She walked slowly to the back booth where Marco was helping Mia put away her crayons. They looked so small sitting there, trusting her to take care of them, trusting her to have answers she didn't have. "Come on, kids. Time to go." "Are we going home now?" Marco asked, hope brightening his dark eyes. Yes, baby, we're going home. The lie tasted bitter in her mouth, but she couldn't tell him the truth. Couldn't tell him that home was just as cold as the street, and they might not have it much longer anyway. They stepped out into the storm, and Elena immediately regretted not accepting the extra scarf Mrs. Chen had offered last week. The wind cut through her thin coat like it was made of paper. Snow stung her face and made her eyes water. I'm cold, Mama, Marco whispered, pressing close to her side. I know, sweetheart. We'll be warm soon. Another lie. They seemed to come easier now. The bus stop was 3 blocks away, but when they reached it, Elena's heart sank. A handwritten sign taped to the shelter read, "Service suspended due to weather conditions." She pulled out her phone with frozen fingers and dialed her sister's number. It rang and rang before going to voicemail. Sarah, it's me. I know we haven't talked since the fight, but I need help. The kids and I are stuck in the storm, and I lost my job. Please, if you get this... The phone died. She'd forgotten to pay the bill again. Mama? Marco's voice was getting smaller. What's wrong? Nothing, baby. Everything's fine. But everything wasn't fine. They were alone in a blizzard with nowhere to go and no way to get there. Elena looked around desperately, trying to spot any place that might still be open. A coffee shop? A convenience store? Anywhere with heat and a few hours of safety. The street was empty except for the falling snow. Most people were smart enough to be inside, warm and safe with their families. Elena had never felt more alone in her life. My feet hurt, Mia whispered. It was the first thing she'd said all day, and Elena almost cried with relief at the sound of her daughter's voice. Okay, baby girl, let's find somewhere to rest. She spotted a bus shelter about a block away. It wasn't much, but the glass walls might block some of the wind. She took each child by the hand and started walking, her feet already numb in her worn sneakers. The shelter smelled like cigarettes and desperation, but it was better than standing in the open. Elena pulled both children close, trying to share what little body heat she had. Mia's cough was getting worse, and Marco's lips were turning blue. Tell me a story, Mama, Marco whispered. One about somewhere warm. Elena closed her eyes, searching for words that might take them far away from this moment. Once upon a time, there was a beautiful beach where the sun always shined. She told them about palm trees and warm sand, about ice cream that never melted, and children who never had to worry about where they would sleep. Marco's eyes grew heavy as she spoke, but Mia stayed awake, her small body shaking with each cough. That's when Elena saw the headlights. A car was coming down the street, moving slowly through the storm. For a moment, she dared to hope it might be a taxi or maybe even a police car that could help them. But as it got closer, she realized it was something else entirely. The car was sleek and black, expensive-looking even through the curtain of snow. It moved with purpose, like its driver knew exactly where he was going. Elena pulled her children closer, suddenly afraid. Cars like that didn't usually come to neighborhoods like this unless someone was in trouble. The car slowed as it passed their shelter, and Elena held her breath. She could see the outline of someone in the driver's seat, but the tinted windows made it impossible to make out any details. Please just keep driving, she prayed silently. Please don't stop. But the car did stop. It pulled over to the curb, engine idling, headlights cutting through the swirling snow. Elena's heart started racing. She thought about running, but where could they go? Marco could barely walk in the deep snow, and Mia was getting sicker by the minute. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out, and Elena's first thought was that he looked completely out of place. He wore a long, dark coat that probably cost more than she made in 6 months. His shoes were polished leather, not the kind of thing you wore in a snowstorm unless you had no choice. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that was quickly becoming dusted with snow. Even from a distance, Elena could see the sharp lines of his face and the way he carried himself, like someone who was used to being in charge. He looked around, his gaze sweeping the empty street before landing on their shelter. For a moment, he just stood there, and Elena wondered if he was lost or maybe looking for an address. Then he started walking toward them. "Mama," Marco whispered, fear creeping into his voice. "Stay close to me," Elena murmured, wrapping her arms tighter around both children. The man approached slowly, his hands visible at his sides. When he got close enough, Elena could see his face clearly. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe mid-30s, with dark eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. There was something intense about him, something that made her think of storms and deep water. "Are you all right?" His voice was deep and careful, like he was trying not to startle them. Elena lifted her chin, trying to look stronger than she felt. "We're fine." He glanced at the children, then back at her face. His expression was unreadable, but something shifted in his eyes when he saw Mia's pale cheeks and Marco's chattering teeth. "You're not fine," he said quietly. "It's 20 degrees out here. We're waiting for the bus." Another lie, but Elena wasn't about to admit their situation to a stranger. "The buses stopped running an hour ago." He took a step closer, and Elena noticed he moved with careful control, like he was holding himself back. "How long have you been out here?" "That's none of your business." "You're right, it isn't." He reached up and began unbuttoning his coat. "But your little girl is turning blue." Elena looked down and felt her heart stop. Mia's lips had taken on a frightening shade of purple, and her small body was shaking uncontrollably. How had she not noticed? How had she let it get this bad? The man slipped off his coat and held it out to her. "Take it." "No." The word came out sharper than Elena intended. "We don't need charity." "It's not charity. It's survival." There was something in his voice that made Elena look at him more carefully. He wasn't looking at her like she was a problem to be solved or a charity case to be pitied. He was looking at her like she was a person making a mistake that might cost her children their lives. "Please," she said, hating how small her voice sounded. "Just leave us alone." He was quiet for a long moment, snow collecting on his dark hair and expensive suit. Then Mia started coughing again, the sound harsh and painful in the cold air. The man's jaw tightened. "I'm calling an ambulance." "No." Elena stood quickly, panic flooding through her. "No hospitals, please." He studied her face, and she had the uncomfortable feeling that he was seeing more than she wanted him to see. Why? Because hospitals asked questions. Because they wanted insurance cards and social security numbers and permanent addresses. Because they might decide that a mother who couldn't provide basic shelter for her children wasn't fit to keep them. We can't." Something changed in his expression. The intensity softened slightly, replaced by what might have been understanding. "Then get in the car." "What?" "You have two choices," he said, his voice matter-of-fact. "Hospital or my car. Choose fast, because your daughter needs to get warm now." Elena stared at him, her mind racing. Every instinct told her not to trust him. Didn't her mother always warn her about strangers with too much money and too much confidence? But Mia's coughing was getting worse, and Marco was starting to look as pale as his sister. "I don't even know your name," she whispered. "Luca." He held out his hand. "And I'm not going to hurt you." She looked at his outstretched hand, then at her children. Mia had stopped shivering, which was somehow more frightening than when she'd been shaking. "Mama?" Marco tugged on her sleeve. "I think Mia's really sick." The decision made itself. Elena reached out and took Luca's coat, wrapping it around Mia's small frame. It swallowed her completely, but she immediately stopped shaking. "Okay," Elena said, the word barely audible above the wind. "Okay." Luca nodded once and started back toward the car. Elena picked up Mia, surprised by how light her daughter felt, and took Marco's hand. They followed Luca through the snow, each step feeling like a choice she couldn't take back. The inside of the car was warm and quiet, a stark contrast to the storm raging outside. The seats were leather, soft and expensive, and Elena was suddenly aware of how shabby they all must look. Luca got behind the wheel and immediately turned up the heat. He pulled out his phone and made a quick call. "Victor, it's me. I need you to prepare the blue guest room and call Dr. Martinez. Tell him to come to the house immediately." He paused, glancing in the rearview mirror at the children. "Yes, children. A little girl who might have hypothermia." Elena's breath caught. "Where are you taking us?" "Somewhere safe." He met her eyes in the mirror. "Somewhere warm." As the car pulled away from the curb, Elena held both of her children close and tried not to think about what she'd just done. She'd gotten into a stranger's car with her children, and now they were driving into the storm with a man who had a doctor on speed dial and could afford leather seats and perfect heat. But Mia had stopped coughing, and Marco was already falling asleep against her shoulder. For the first time in hours, her children were warm and safe. Maybe that was enough. Maybe for tonight that was everything. The car moved smoothly through the empty streets, windshield wipers fighting against the endless snow. Elena watched the familiar buildings of her neighborhood disappear behind them, replaced by houses that got bigger and fancier with each mile. She was taking her children into a world she didn't understand, with a man she didn't know, because she'd run out of choices and luck and hope all at the same time. But as Luca's coat wrapped around Mia like a promise, Elena allowed herself to believe that sometimes strangers appeared in storms for reasons that had nothing to do with chance. Sometimes they appeared because someone, somewhere, was finally listening to the prayers you were too tired to say out loud. And sometimes, just sometimes, saying yes to the impossible was the only way to save the people you loved most. The snow continued to fall as they drove deeper into the night, and Elena closed her eyes and held her children close, letting the warmth of the car carry them all toward whatever came next. The Moretti mansion rose from the snow like something out of a fairy tale. Elena pressed her face to the window, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Iron gates opened silently as their car approached, revealing a long driveway lined with tall pine trees heavy with snow. The house itself was enormous, 3 stories of warm stone and glowing windows that promised heat and safety. "This is where you live?" Marco whispered, his eyes wide with wonder. Luca glanced back at them. "Yes." Elena's stomach twisted with new anxiety. What kind of man lived in a place like this? And what did he want in return for helping them? The car stopped under a covered entrance, and immediately the front door opened. A woman emerged, older and sturdy-looking, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore a simple dress and an apron, but she moved with the kind of quiet authority that came from running a household. "Mr. Moretti," she said as Luca got out of the car, "Dr. Martinez is already here, waiting in the guest room." "Thank you, Signora Bianca." Luca opened Elena's door. "This is Elena and her children, Mia and Marco. They'll be staying with us tonight." Signora Bianca's weathered face softened as she looked at the twins. "Oh, you poor little ones. Come inside where it's warm." Elena hesitated at the threshold. The entryway was bigger than her entire apartment, with marble floors and a chandelier that sparkled like captured stars. Everything looked expensive and untouchable, and she suddenly felt very aware of her wet shoes and secondhand clothes. "I should take my shoes off," she said quietly. "Nonsense." Signora Bianca waved her hand. "Shoes can be cleaned. Children cannot catch pneumonia twice. Come." They followed her up a curved staircase that belonged in a movie. Elena kept one hand on Marco's shoulder and carried Mia, who had grown heavy and warm in her arms. The little girl's breathing was easier now, but Elena could still hear a slight wheeze that made her worry. The guest room was painted a soft blue with a large bed covered in white linens and a fireplace where logs crackled cheerfully. Dr. Martinez, a kind-faced man with gentle hands, was waiting with his medical bag. "Let me take a look at this little one," he said, reaching for Mia. Elena's arms tightened around her daughter. She'd learned not to trust easily, especially when it came to her children. "It's all right," Luca said quietly from the doorway. "Dr. Martinez has been taking care of my family for 20 years. Something in his voice made Elena look at him more carefully. There was a sadness there, hidden beneath the surface, that spoke of losses she didn't understand. She slowly lowered Mia onto the bed. The examination was quick and thorough. Dr. Martinez listened to Mia's chest, checked her temperature, and looked into her eyes with a small flashlight. "Mild hypothermia," he announced, "but nothing serious. She needs to stay warm and drink plenty of fluids. The cough should clear up in a day or two with rest." Elena felt her knees go weak with relief. "She's going to be okay?" "She's going to be fine." The doctor smiled at her. "You got her inside just in time." As Dr. Martinez packed up his supplies, Signora Bianca bustled around the room, pulling extra blankets from a cedar chest and adjusting the pillows. "I'll bring up some hot soup and tea," she said, "and maybe some of those cookies I made yesterday. Children always feel better with something sweet in their stomachs." Elena wanted to protest, to insist they didn't need so much kindness, but Marco was already exploring the room with wide eyes, and Mia was snuggling deeper into the soft blankets. "Thank you," Elena said instead, the words feeling both inadequate and enormous. "Sleep well," Luca said from the doorway. "We'll talk in the morning." After everyone left, Elena sat on the edge of the bed and watched her children settle into comfort she couldn't provide. The room was so quiet after months of hearing traffic and sirens and the couple next door fighting through thin walls. "Mama?" Marco climbed up beside her. "Are we safe here?" "Yes, baby, we're safe." For tonight, at least, it was true. Elena woke to the sound of voices in the hallway and sunlight streaming through windows she didn't recognize. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then she saw Mia and Marco still sleeping peacefully in the big bed, and everything came flooding back. The storm, the stranger in the expensive car, the mansion that felt like stepping into someone else's life. She slipped out of bed quietly and moved to the window. The snow had stopped falling, but the world outside was transformed. Everything was clean and white and beautiful, like nature had decided to start over. "They're still sleeping." Elena spun around to find Luca standing in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee. He'd changed clothes since last night, trading his expensive suit for dark jeans and a sweater that made him look younger and somehow more approachable. "I brought you coffee," he said, holding out one of the cups. "Signora Bianca thought you might need it." Elena accepted the cup gratefully, wrapping her cold fingers around the warm ceramic. The coffee was perfect, strong and rich, and exactly what she needed. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. Last night, I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't stopped." Luca was quiet for a moment, looking out of the window at the snow-covered grounds. "I lost my daughter when she was about Mia's age," he said finally. "Different circumstances, but when I saw you 3 in that shelter, I couldn't just drive past." Elena felt her heart catch. She wanted to ask what happened, wanted to offer some kind of comfort, but the sadness in his voice warned her away from the subject. "How old was she?" she asked gently. 6. The word came out rough and quiet. "Her name was Sophia." They stood in comfortable silence, drinking their coffee and watching the snow. Elena found herself studying Luca's profile. The strong jaw, the dark eyes that seemed to carry too many secrets. The way he held himself like someone who was used to being in control, but wasn't quite sure what to do with the tenderness he was trying to hide. "Mama!" Marco's excited voice broke the spell. "Look how tall this ceiling is." Her son was awake and bouncing on the bed, his earlier fears apparently forgotten. Mia was stirring too, her cheeks pink with health instead of the frightening blue of last night. "Good morning, sweetheart." Elena sat down beside her daughter and felt her forehead. Normal temperature. The relief was overwhelming. "I'm hungry," Mia whispered, and Elena almost cried with joy at hearing her daughter's voice. "Then let's go find some breakfast," Luca said. "Signora Bianca has been cooking all morning." The kitchen was enormous, with gleaming appliances and a table that could seat 12 people easily. But it felt warm and lived in, filled with the smell of bacon and fresh bread and something that might have been cinnamon rolls. Signora Bianca fussed over the children, piling their plates high with scrambled eggs and pancakes and fresh fruit. Elena tried to eat, but her stomach was twisted with anxiety about what came next. "The roads are still pretty bad," Luca said, as if reading her mind. "The city's asking people to stay inside unless it's an emergency." "We should go," Elena said quickly. "We've imposed enough." "Where exactly are you planning to go?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Elena looked down at her plate, avoiding his eyes. The truth was, she didn't know. Their apartment was just as cold as it had been yesterday, and now she didn't even have a job to look forward to. "We have a place," she said finally. "Do you?" Something in his tone made her look up. His dark eyes were steady and knowing, and Elena had the uncomfortable feeling that he could see right through her. "Look," she said, her pride flaring, "I appreciate what you did for us last night, but we're not your responsibility. We can take care of ourselves. Can you?" He leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Your daughter was hypothermic last night. You don't have a car, you don't have winter clothes that fit, and unless I'm mistaken, you don't have anywhere warm to take them." Elena's cheeks burned. "That's not your problem." "You're right. It's not." He stood up and walked to the counter, returning with an envelope. "There's enough here to get you through a few weeks. Find somewhere safe for your children." Elena stared at the envelope like it might bite her. "I can't take your money." "Why not?" "Because I don't know what you want in return." Something flickered across Luca's face. Surprise, maybe, or hurt. "I don't want anything." "Everyone wants something." Elena's voice was sharper than she intended, but the words kept coming. "Especially men like you." "Men like me?" She gestured around the expensive kitchen, at the perfectly pressed clothes and the way he moved through his world like he owned it. Rich men, powerful men, men who think they can buy whatever they want. Luca was very quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "What exactly do you think I am, Elena?" Before she could answer, a loud crash echoed from the front of the house, glass breaking, followed by shouts. Luca was on his feet instantly, his entire demeanor changing from gentle host to something much more dangerous. "Victor!" he called, and Elena heard heavy footsteps running toward them. A man appeared in the kitchen doorway, tall and broad, with a scar running down his left cheek and eyes that had seen too much. This had to be Victor, the man Luca had called last night. "Someone threw a brick through the front window," Victor reported. There was a note. He handed Luca a piece of paper, and Elena watched the color drain from Luca's face as he read it. His jaw clenched, and when he looked up, his eyes had gone cold and hard. "What does it say?" Elena asked, though part of her didn't want to know. Luca crumpled the paper in his fist. "It says She belongs to us. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. She knew exactly who they were, and the knowledge made her sick with fear. Her ex-husband had always been weak and cruel, but he'd also been a coward. If he was bold enough to threaten her now, it meant he'd found someone to hide behind. Someone dangerous. "I have to go," she said, standing so quickly her chair scraped against the floor. "This is exactly why we can't stay. I won't bring trouble to your house." "You're not going anywhere." Luca's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "Not until I know who sent this and what they want." "I know who sent it." Elena's hands were shaking as she reached for Marco and Mia. "My ex-husband. He's been trying to get custody of the kids, and he'll use anything to prove I'm an unfit mother." "Including having you followed? Having rocks thrown through windows?" Elena's blood went cold. "Followed? How else would they know you were here?" Luca's eyes were dark with fury. "Someone's been watching you." The room seemed to tilt around Elena. She thought about all the times lately when she'd felt like someone was behind her on the street, all the hang-up calls to their apartment, the feeling of being watched that she'd dismissed as paranoia. "Oh, God," she whispered. "The kids, if they've been watching us—" "They're safe here," Luca said firmly. "But you're not safe out there. Not anymore." Elena wanted to argue, wanted to insist they could handle this on their own, but the truth was staring her in the face. She had no money, no car, no way to protect her children from whatever her ex-husband had gotten himself mixed up in. "I don't understand," she said, sinking back into her chair. "Why now? Why would he suddenly—" She trailed off as the pieces started coming together. The mysterious phone calls, the way he'd seemed so confident during their last court hearing, the expensive lawyer he'd somehow managed to afford. "He found a sponsor," she said slowly, "someone with money and influence who thinks they can use my children to get to—" She looked up at Luca, really seeing him for the first time. The expensive clothes, the mansion, the way Victor moved like a bodyguard, the doctor who made house calls, the casual authority in everything he did. "What exactly do you do for a living?" she asked quietly. Luca met her eyes without flinching. "I solve problems." "What kind of problems?" "The kind that require discretion." It wasn't really an answer, but Elena understood anyway. She'd grown up in neighborhoods where everyone knew who the dangerous men were, even if they never talked about it directly. She knew the signs, the careful words, the expensive cars, the way people either feared them or tried to get close to them. "You're—" She couldn't bring herself to say the word. "I'm someone who can protect you and your children," Luca said simply. "That's all that matters right now." Elena looked at Marco and Mia, who were still eating their breakfast, oblivious to the dangers circling around them. Her son was laughing at something Signora Bianca had whispered in his ear. Her daughter was actually smiling. When was the last time her children had felt safe enough to laugh? "If I stay," she said carefully, "what happens then?" "Then we figure out who's threatening you and why. And we make sure they understand that you and your children are under my protection." "And after that?" Luca was quiet for a long moment. "After that, we'll see." It wasn't much of a plan, but it was more than Elena had. And despite everything her mind was telling her about the danger of getting involved with a man like Luca, her heart was telling her something different. It was telling her that sometimes the most dangerous choice was also the safest one. Sometimes the wolf was the only thing standing between you and the pack. "Okay," she said quietly. "We'll stay. For now." Luca nodded once, and Elena had the strange feeling that she'd just changed the course of all their lives with those 3 simple words. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the broken glass and the threatening note with a blanket of white that made everything look clean and new. But Elena knew that underneath the beauty, the danger was still there, waiting. 3 days later, Elena was beginning to understand the rhythm of life in the Moretti mansion. Mornings meant coffee with Signora Bianca in the kitchen while the children ate breakfast. Afternoons were spent in the sunroom, where Mia had claimed a corner near the windows to draw her pictures. Evenings brought quiet dinners and the kind of peace Elena had almost forgotten existed. But beneath the calm surface, tension hummed like electricity in the air. Luca spent most of his time in his office, speaking in low voices with men who came and went through side entrances. Victor was always somewhere nearby, his watchful presence a constant reminder that they weren't really guests. They were people who needed protecting. Elena tried not to think too hard about what that meant. "Mama, look what I made," Mia said, holding up her latest drawing. It showed 4 stick figures standing in front of a big house. 2 small ones, one medium-sized one with long hair, and one tall one with broad shoulders. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." Elena studied the picture more carefully. "Who's this one?" She pointed to the tall figure. "That's Luca," Mia said matter-of-factly. "He lives here with us now." Elena's chest tightened. Her children were getting attached, and she didn't know how to explain that this was temporary. That real life was waiting for them outside these protected walls. "Mia, honey, we're just visiting here. This isn't our home." "But I like it here," Mia said quietly. "Nobody yells. And Luca reads stories with different voices." Before Elena could respond, Marco came running into the sunroom, his cheeks flushed with excitement. "Mama, Luca said he'll show me how to build a fort in the library. Can I, please?" Elena looked at her son's bright face and felt her heart crack a little. When was the last time he'd been this happy? When was the last time either of her children had felt secure enough to ask for things instead of just hoping for them? "If Mr. Moretti has time," she said carefully. "He said to call him Luca," Marco informed her, "and he's not busy right now. Victor told him all the important meetings were done for today." "What do you know about meetings?" Elena asked, surprised. Marco shrugged. "Victor talks to me sometimes. He says Luca works really hard to keep people safe, like a policeman, but different." Elena's blood chilled. How much had her 7-year-old son figured out about their situation? How much should she tell him? "Marco," she said gently, "what exactly has Victor told you?" "Just that there are some bad people who want to hurt us, but Luca won't let them. He said Luca is really good at protecting families." The innocent trust in her son's voice made Elena want to cry. Marco had learned too young that the world wasn't always safe, but he was still young enough to believe that good people could make it better. "Can we build the fort now?" Marco asked again. Elena looked at her children, really looked at them. Mia's cheeks had color again, and her cough was completely gone. Marco was bouncing with energy instead of looking over his shoulder every few minutes. For the first time in months, they looked like children instead of tiny refugees. "Okay," she said. "Let's go. Find Luca." They found him in his office, sitting behind a massive wooden desk covered with papers. He was on the phone, speaking in rapid Italian, but when he saw them in the doorway, his expression softened. "I'll call you back," he said into the phone, then hung up. "Marco, are you ready to build the greatest blanket fort in the history of blanket forts?" "Yes." Marco pumped his fist in the air. "Then let's get started. We'll need supplies." Luca stood up and straightened his tie. "Signora Bianca keeps the good sheets in the linen closet. Elena, would you like to help us engineer this masterpiece?" Elena hesitated. Part of her wanted to keep her distance, to maintain the boundaries that would make leaving easier when the time came. But Mia was already tugging on her hand, and Marco was practically vibrating with excitement. "I suppose someone needs to make sure you don't bring down the whole library," she said. Luca's smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. Very practical. I like that in a construction supervisor. The next hour was filled with laughter and creative chaos. They draped sheets over chairs and tables, secured corners with heavy books, and created tunnels that connected different sections of the fort. Elena found herself getting caught up in the project, adding her own suggestions and laughing when Marco insisted they needed a secret entrance. "Every good fort needs an escape route," he declared seriously. "Smart thinking," Luca agreed. "You never know when you might need to make a quick exit." Elena caught something in his tone, experience speaking through playfulness. She wondered how many times Luca had needed to make a quick exit from dangerous situations. How many times he'd been the one creating escape routes instead of playing with children in blanket forts. When they finished, the fort took up half the library. It was elaborate and ridiculous and absolutely perfect. Marco crawled inside immediately, followed by Mia, who giggled as she disappeared into the maze of sheets and pillows. "Not bad for amateurs," Luca said, surveying their work. "Speak for yourself," Elena replied. "I'll have you know I was the blanket fort champion of my neighborhood when I was 8. "Were you now?" Luca's eyes crinkled with amusement. "I'm impressed. That's serious competition." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. When was the last time a man had looked at her like that? Like she was interesting and funny instead of just another problem to solve? "Mama, come in here," Mia called from inside the fort. "It's like a secret house." Elena got down on her hands and knees and crawled through the entrance Marco had designed. The inside of the fort was dim and cozy, lit by the soft light filtering through the white sheets. Both children were sitting cross-legged on a pile of pillows, their faces glowing with contentment. "This is the best house ever," Marco announced. "Better than our real house?" Elena asked gently. Marco's face grew thoughtful. "Our real house was cold, and you were always worried. Hear you smile more." Elena's throat tightened. She hadn't realized her children had been so aware of her stress, of the constant fear that had become the soundtrack of their lives. "Mama?" Mia crawled closer and curled up against Elena's side. "Can we stay here forever?" "Oh, sweetheart." Elena stroked her daughter's hair. "This isn't our house. We're just visiting while the storm passes." "But what if the storm doesn't pass?" Marco asked. "What if it keeps snowing forever?" Elena was saved from having to answer by Luca's voice from outside the fort. "Is there room in there for one more?" "Yes," both children shouted at once. A moment later, Luca was crawling through the entrance, looking slightly ridiculous as he tried to fold his large frame into the small space. He settled cross-legged next to Marco, his expensive suit somehow not looking out of place among the pillows and sheets. "This is an impressive fort," he said seriously. "Very architecturally sound." "What does that mean?" Marco asked. "It means it's built well, strong and safe." "Like your house?" Luca glanced at Elena, and she saw something complicated pass across his face. "Yes, like my house. But you know what makes a house really strong?" Marco shook his head. "The people inside it. A house is just walls and a roof until you fill it with people who care about each other." "Is that why you helped us?" Mia asked quietly. "Because you care about us?" Luca was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than Elena had ever heard it. "Yes, Mia, that's exactly why." Something shifted in the air between them. Elena found herself looking at Luca, really looking at him, and seeing not just the dangerous stranger who had rescued them from the storm, but a man who was capable of gentleness. A man who read bedtime stories with different voices and built elaborate blanket forts and spoke to her children like their opinions mattered. A man who looked at her sometimes like she was something precious instead of something broken. Their peaceful moment was interrupted by Victor's voice from somewhere outside the fort. "Boss, we need to talk." Luca sighed. "Duty calls. But this fort isn't going anywhere. We can have dinner in here later if you want." "Really?" Marco's eyes went wide. "Really. Elena, would that be okay?" Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. As Luca crawled out of the fort, she heard him speaking quietly with Victor. "What is it?" "News about Romano. He's making moves." "What kind of moves?" "The kind that mean this situation is about to get more complicated." Elena's blood turned to ice. She'd been so caught up in the warmth and safety of the mansion that she'd almost forgotten about the danger waiting outside. But it was still there, getting closer with each passing day. "Mama?" Marco had crawled over to her, his face worried. "Are the bad people coming back?" Elena pulled both her children close, wishing she could keep them safe inside this cocoon of sheets and pillows forever. But the real world was calling, and she was beginning to realize that hiding from it wasn't going to make it go away. "I don't know, baby," she whispered, "but whatever happens, we'll face it together." Through the thin walls of their blanket fort, she could hear Luca's voice getting harder and more dangerous as he spoke with Victor. The gentle man who had just spent an hour building a children's fort was transforming back into someone else. Someone who lived in a world where threats were real and protection came at a price. Elena closed her eyes and held her children tight, wondering if she was falling for a man who could keep them safe or falling for a man who might destroy them all. Outside their fort, the afternoon light was fading, and somewhere in the city, dangerous people were making plans that would change all their lives. But for now, in this moment, they were together and warm and safe. Elena told herself that was enough. She told herself it had to be. That night, Elena stood at the window of her room, watching the snow fall over the mansion's grounds. The children were asleep in the big bed, finally peaceful after weeks of restless nights. Mia had talked during dinner, actually talked in full sentences, like the silent spell that had gripped her since the divorce was finally breaking. A soft knock at the door made her turn around. "Come in," she called quietly. Luca appeared in the doorway, still wearing his suit, but with his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up. He looked tired, and Elena could see the weight of whatever Victor had told him earlier. "How are they sleeping?" he asked, glancing toward the bed. "Better than they have in months." Elena wrapped her arms around herself. "Thank you for today. The fort, the dinner, all of it. They needed—" what did they need? "To feel like children again instead of refugees." Luca stepped into the room, closing the door softly behind him. "And what do you need, Elena?" The question caught her off guard. When was the last time someone had asked what she needed instead of what she could provide? "I need to know they're going to be safe," she said finally. "They will be." "How can you be sure?" Luca moved to stand beside her at the window. In the reflection, Elena could see both their faces, his strong and determined, hers worried and uncertain. "Because I won't let anything happen to them," he said simply. "Why?" The question came out whisper soft. "Why do you care so much about strangers you found in a storm?" Luca was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old grief. "I told you I lost my daughter. What I didn't tell you was that I lost my wife too. Car accident, 3 years ago. They were coming home from Sophia's dance recital when a drunk driver ran a red light." Elena's heart clenched. "Luca, I'm so sorry. For 3 years, I've been going through the motions of living, working, eating, sleeping, but not really alive. This house has been like a tomb." He paused, looking out at the snow. "Then I found you 3 in that storm, and suddenly there were voices in the hallways again, laughter, life. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. We won't be here forever. I know. He turned to look at her directly. But while you are here, I want to do everything I can to give your children what mine never got to have. What's that? A chance to grow up? The words hung between them, heavy with meaning Elena was afraid to examine too closely. She was beginning to understand that Luca wasn't just protecting them from her ex-husband's threats. He was protecting them from a world that had already taken too much from too many children, including his own. The fort, she said suddenly. You built forts with Sophia, didn't you? Luca's smile was sad and sweet. She was the queen of blanket fort construction, could turn the entire living room into a castle in 20 minutes flat. Elena felt something warm and dangerous bloom in her chest. It would be so easy to fall for this man, this contradictory, complicated man who could be deadly and gentle in the same breath. But falling for him would mean accepting a life she didn't understand, in a world where protection came with prices she might not be willing to pay. Luca, she said carefully, what Victor told you today? How bad is it? His expression shifted, becoming more guarded. Romano is escalating things. He's not just interested in using you to get to me anymore. He wants custody of the children. Elena's stomach dropped. What do you mean? Your ex-husband has been telling people that you're an unfit mother, that you're living with a criminal, exposing the children to danger. Romano's lawyers are preparing to file for emergency custody. The room seemed to tilt around Elena. They can't do that. I'm their mother. They can try, and with my reputation, they might succeed. Elena sank into the chair by the window, her legs suddenly unable to support her. This is my fault. I brought this to your door. No. Luca's voice was firm. This started long before you met me. Romano has been looking for leverage against me for years. Your ex-husband just gave him an opportunity. So what do? We prove that you're exactly the kind of mother those children need. Strong, protective, willing to do whatever it takes to keep them safe. Elena looked up at him, seeing the determination in his dark eyes. And how do we do that? We get married. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. She stared at Luca, certain she'd heard him wrong. What? We get married, he repeated calmly. Legal, legitimate marriage. It gives you protection under my name, and it gives the children a stable home environment that no court can argue with. Elena's mind reeled. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. Luca, we barely know each other. We know enough. He knelt down, beside her chair, his voice gentle but urgent. We know that I would die before I let anyone hurt you or those children. We know that you would do anything to keep them safe. We know that they're already starting to heal in this house. Marriage isn't a business arrangement, Elena protested. Isn't it? Luca's eyes were steady on hers. I'm not asking you to love me, Elena. I'm asking you to let me protect you. Let me give your children the life they deserve. Elena felt tears spilling down her cheeks. It was everything she'd ever wanted for Marco and Mia. Safety, stability, a home where they could laugh without looking over their shoulders. But it was also terrifying, binding herself to a man whose world she didn't understand. What about you? She whispered. What do you get out of this? Luca's expression softened. I get to hear children's laughter in my house again. I get to read bedtime stories and build blanket forts and remember what it feels like to have a family. Elena closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was offering. A life, a future, protection for her children that she could never provide on her own. When she opened her eyes again, Luca was still kneeling beside her chair, waiting patiently for her answer. If I say yes, she said quietly, what happens to us? To you and me? I don't know, he admitted, but I'd like to find out. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the world in silence and possibility. Elena thought about her children sleeping peacefully in the next room. She thought about the way Mia had talked at dinner, the way Marco had laughed while building their fort. She thought about the broken window and the threatening note and all the ways their old life had been falling apart. Then she thought about Luca's gentle hands as he'd carried Mia to the car. The way he'd listened to Marco's excited chatter about the fort. The sadness in his eyes when he talked about his lost family and the hope that flickered there when he looked at hers. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay?" "Yes." Elena took a shaky breath. "I'll marry you." Luca's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. He reached out and took her hands, his thumb brushing away a tear she didn't realize had fallen. "I promise you won't regret this," he said. Elena hoped he was right, because she was about to trust this complicated, dangerous, tender-hearted man with everything that mattered to her. She was about to bet her children's future on the possibility that sometimes the safest place to land was in the arms of the storm itself. The wedding took place in the mansion's library 3 days later. Elena stood in front of the mirror in her room, adjusting the simple white dress that Signora Bianca had somehow produced overnight. It wasn't the wedding dress she'd dreamed of as a little girl, but then again, this wasn't the wedding she'd ever imagined having. "You look beautiful, Mama," Mia said from her perch on the bed. She was wearing a new blue dress that matched her eyes, her dark hair pulled back with a ribbon. "Like a princess," Marco added, straightening his tiny tie. He'd been practicing walking down the aisle with the rings for the past hour, taking his role as ring-bearer very seriously. Elena smiled at her children, her heart full of love and terror in equal measure. In 10 minutes, she would marry a man she'd known for less than a week, a man whose world was filled with shadows and danger, a man who had saved them from a storm and was now promising to protect them from all the storms to come. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Signora Bianca entered, carrying a small bouquet of white roses and baby's breath. "From the greenhouse," she explained, placing the flowers in Elena's hands. "Mr. Moretti thought you should have something beautiful to carry." Elena brought the bouquet to her face, breathing in the sweet fragrance. Even in the middle of winter, even in the middle of chaos, Luca had found a way to give her flowers. "Signora Bianca," Elena said quietly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, dear." "How long have you worked for Luca?" 15 years, since before he married his first wife." The older woman's expression grew fond and sad. "I watched him fall in love with Anna, watched him become a father to little Sophia, and I watched him break when he lost them. Was he different before?" Signora Bianca considered the question carefully. "He was harder, I think. The family business requires a certain toughness, but Anna softened him, made him remember that there was more to life than power and protection." "And after he lost them?" "After, he forgot how to be anything but the boss. Until now." Signora Bianca smiled at Elena. "These past days, I've seen glimpses of the man Anna fell in love with. The man who used to build elaborate tea party setups for Sophia and leave little love notes in Anna's coat pockets." Elena felt her chest tighten. "I'm not trying to replace them." "Oh, my dear." Signora Bianca touched Elena's cheek gently. "You're not replacing them. You're reminding him that his heart didn't die with them, that he's still capable of loving and being loved." Another knock interrupted them, this one firmer and more urgent. "Elena?" Luca's voice came through the door. "Victor needs to speak with us before the ceremony." Elena's stomach dropped. In her nervousness about the wedding, she'd almost forgotten about the danger that had brought them to this moment. She opened the door to find Luca waiting in the hallway, looking devastatingly handsome in a dark suit. His expression was serious, but when he saw her in the white dress, his eyes went soft. "You look," he cleared his throat, "beautiful." "What's wrong?" Elena asked, reading the tension in his shoulders. "Victor has news about Romano. Good news, actually, but we need to discuss timing." They found Victor in Luca's office, his expression more relaxed than Elena had seen it since her arrival. He stood when they entered, nodding respectfully to Elena. "Ma'am, boss." He turned to Luca. "Romano's been arrested." Elena felt her knees go weak. Arrested? FBI had been building a case against him for months, Victor explained. Money laundering, racketeering, the works. They moved this morning. "What about my ex-husband?" Elena asked. "Picked up as an accessory. Turns out he was helping Romano move money through some shell companies. He's looking at serious time." Elena sank into a chair, overwhelmed. "So it's over." "The immediate threat is over," Luca confirmed. "But Elena, there's something else. With Romano in custody, the custody case disappears. You and the children are free to make your own choices." Elena understood what he was saying. The emergency that had prompted his proposal was gone. If she wanted to, she could take her children and leave, start over somewhere new, somewhere safe. She looked at Luca's face, trying to read his expression. Was he hoping she would leave? Had the proposal been purely practical, something he would now regret? "Do you want to postpone the wedding?" she asked quietly. "Do you?" Elena's heart pounded as she considered the question. The logical answer was yes. They could take time now, get to know each other properly, figure out if what they felt was real or just gratitude and circumstance. But then she thought about Marco's laughter as he'd built blanket forts. She thought about Mia talking again, drawing pictures of their family. She thought about waking up every morning in a house filled with warmth instead of fear. She thought about the way Luca looked at her children like they were precious gifts, the way he'd carried Mia to safety in the storm, the gentle way he'd bandaged Marco's scraped knee yesterday when he'd fallen in the garden. "No," she said firmly, "I don't want to postpone it." Luca's smile could have powered the entire mansion. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." Elena stood up, smoothing down her dress. "I'm marrying you because I want to, not because I have to. Even knowing what my world involves, the danger, the complications." Elena thought about everything she'd observed over the past week. The way the household staff looked at Luca with respect and affection, not fear. The way Victor spoke about protecting families like it was a sacred duty. The careful way Luca had explained that his business was about solving problems for people who had nowhere else to turn. "Your world involves protecting people," she said, "including us. I can live with that." Victor cleared his throat. "If I may, boss, the judge is waiting in the library." Elena's eyes widened. "There's a judge here?" "Judge Martinez, Dr. Martinez's brother," Luca explained. "He's been a family friend for years." "Is he?" "Completely legitimate," Luca assured her. "He just happens to understand the need for discretion." Elena took a deep breath. This was it. In a few minutes, she would be Elena Moretti, wife to a man who had walked into her life like an answer to prayers she hadn't known she was saying. "Are you ready?" Luca asked, offering her his arm. "Yes," she said, surprised to find that she meant it completely. The library had been transformed. Candles flickered on every surface, casting warm golden light over the room. The blanket fort had been carefully moved aside, replaced by an archway of evergreen branches and white roses. Judge Martinez stood at the front, a kind-faced man who looked remarkably like his doctor brother. Signora Bianca sat in one of the chairs, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Victor stood at Luca's side, looking uncomfortable in his role as best man, but determined to do his duty. Elena walked slowly down the makeshift aisle, her children flanking her like tiny guardians. When she reached Luca, he took her hand and squeezed it gently. "Dearly beloved," Judge Martinez began, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Luca Moretti and Elena Rossi." Elena barely heard the traditional words. Instead, she found herself lost in Luca's dark eyes, seeing her future reflected there. A future filled with laughter and warmth, and the kind of love she'd thought existed only in fairy tales. "Do you, Luca, take Elena to be your wife, to love and protect in good times and bad, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Luca said, his voice strong and sure. "Do you, Elena, take Luca to be your husband, to love and support in good times and bad, for as long as you both shall live?" Elena looked at her children, both watching with bright, hopeful faces. Then she looked back at Luca, at this man who had rescued them from more than just a storm. "I do. By the power vested in me by the state, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Luca, you may kiss your bride." Luca's hands were gentle as he cupped Elena's face. The kiss was soft and sweet, full of promise and possibility. When they broke apart, Marco whooped with excitement, and Mia clapped her hands together. "Ladies and gentlemen," Judge Martinez announced with a smile, "I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Moretti." The celebration that followed was small but perfect. Signora Bianca had prepared a beautiful dinner, complete with a cake that somehow appeared despite having only a few hours' notice. They ate and laughed and toasted to new beginnings. As the evening wound down, Elena found herself standing on the terrace with Luca, looking out over the snow-covered gardens. Her children were inside with Signora Bianca, probably eating more cake than was good for them. "Any regrets?" Luca asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Elena leaned back against his chest, feeling his warmth and strength surrounding her. "Just one." She felt him tense. "What's that?" "I regret that it took a blizzard for us to find each other." Luca's laugh rumbled through his chest. "I don't regret that at all. I think that storm was exactly what we both needed." Elena turned in, his arms studying his face in the moonlight. "What happens now?" "Now we build a life together, you and me and Marco and Mia. We turn this house back into a home." "It won't always be easy," Elena warned. "The children will have hard days, remembering everything that happened before. And I'm still learning how to trust again." "I know." Luca brushed a strand of hair from her face. "But we don't have to be perfect, Elena. We just have to be there for each other." Elena stood on her tiptoes and kissed him, pouring all her hope and gratitude and growing love into the gesture. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. "I love you," she whispered, the words coming from somewhere deep in her heart. "I love you too," he replied without hesitation, "all of you. You've given me back something I thought I'd lost forever." "What's that?" "A reason to come home." They stood together in the snow, holding each other close and watching their children's silhouettes move around inside the warm, bright house. Elena thought about everything that had brought them to this moment: the job loss, the storm, the brick through the window, the threats that had seemed so terrifying just days ago. All of it had led them here, to this man, to this life, to this family they were building from the pieces of their broken hearts. 6 months later, spring had finally arrived, melting the last of the winter snow and filling the mansion's gardens with the promise of new growth. Elena knelt in the herb garden, teaching Mia how to plant basil while Marco helped by digging enthusiastic holes that may or may not have been in the right places. "Careful with the roots, sweetheart," Elena instructed, watching Mia gently place a seedling in the soft earth. "Like this, Mama? Perfect." Elena smiled as she watched her daughter work. Mia had been talking regularly for months now, her silence finally broken by the security of knowing she was truly safe. Marco had stopped having nightmares, and both children had grown taller and stronger in the months since they'd found their home. Their home. Elena still felt a flutter of wonder every time she thought those words. "Mrs. Moretti?" Victor appeared at the edge of the garden, his expression amused. "Your husband is looking for you." "Did he say what he needed?" Elena asked, wiping dirt from her hands. "Just that it was urgent," Victor replied, but the slight smile on his scarred face suggested it wasn't the dangerous kind of urgent they'd once worried about. Elena found Luca in the sunroom, pacing nervously in front of the windows. He wore jeans and a simple shirt, his weekend uniform, as Mia called it. When he saw her, his face lit up with relief. "There you are. I have something for you." "What's the occasion?" "Do I need an occasion to give my wife a gift?" Elena raised an eyebrow. In their 6 months of marriage, she'd learned to read Luca's expressions. This particular combination of excitement and nervousness usually meant he'd done something wonderful and possibly overwhelming. "What did you do?" she asked suspiciously. Instead of answering, Luca led her to the small table where afternoon tea was usually served. On it sat a manila envelope and a set of keys. Elena looked at the keys, then at Luca. "What are these for?" "Open the envelope first." With trembling fingers, Elena opened the envelope and pulled out a thick stack of papers. Legal documents. Her eyes scanned the first page, trying to make sense of the formal language. "Luca, what is this?" "It's the deed to the house on Maple Street. The one you showed me last week when we drove through your old neighborhood." Elena's heart stopped. She remembered that drive, how she'd pointed out a small blue house with a white picket fence and told him it had always been her dream home. The kind of place where children could ride bikes in the driveway and have birthday parties in the backyard. "You bought it?" "We bought it," Luca corrected. I hoped that maybe you'd like a place that was just ours, where we could start fresh, build our own memories." Elena stared at the papers, overwhelmed. The house on Maple Street was everything she'd ever dreamed of, modest but perfect, in a neighborhood where children played in the yards and neighbors knew each other's names. "But this house," she said, gesturing around the sunroom, "this is your family home." "This is my father's house," Luca said quietly. "It's filled with his memories, his business, his world. I want us to have a place that's just ours, where Marco can have friends over without worrying about security guards, where Mia can paint pictures on her bedroom walls if she wants to." Elena felt tears spring to her eyes. "You want to give up all this?" "I want to give you everything." Luca took her hands, his expression earnest. "Elena, these past 6 months have been the happiest of my life. Watching our children grow and heal, falling in love with you more every day. I want to build a normal life with you, or as normal as possible. What about your business?" "Victor's been ready to take over for years. It's time for me to step back, focus on what really matters." Luca smiled. "Besides, someone needs to coach Marco's little league team. I hear they're looking for volunteers." Elena laughed through her tears, picturing Luca trying to teach 7-year-olds how to swing a bat. "You've really thought this through." "I've thought about nothing else since the day I married you. Elena, will you help me turn that house into a home?" Instead of answering with words, Elena threw her arms around his neck and kissed him with all the love and gratitude in her heart. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Is that a yes?" Luca asked. "That's a yes to everything," Elena whispered. "To the house, to the normal life, to growing old together and watching our children become the amazing people I know they're going to be. Our children, Luca repeated, and Elena could hear the wonder in his voice. He'd started referring to Marco and Mia that way months ago, but it still made her heart flutter every time. Speaking of our children, Elena said, glancing toward the garden, we should probably tell them about the move before they plan any more elaborate improvements to their blanket fort. Actually, Luca said, looking slightly sheepish, I may have already mentioned the possibility of them having their own rooms, with windows facing the backyard, and a tree perfect for a swing. Luca Moretti, Elena said, trying to sound stern and failing completely. Did you bribe our children with promises of swings and separate bedrooms? I may have implied that such things were possible in our new house. Elena shook her head, but she was smiling. You're incorrigible. But you love me anyway. I love you especially because of it. They walked hand in hand back to the garden, where they found Marco and Mia covered in dirt and giggling as they helped Signora Bianca plant tomatoes. When the children saw them approaching, they ran over with muddy hands and bright smiles. Mama, Luca! Marco launched himself at Luca's legs. Signora Bianca says we can plant flowers that will grow really, really tall. That sounds wonderful, Elena said, but we have some exciting news to share with you. What kind of news? Mia asked, slipping her clean hand into Elena's dirty one. How would you feel about moving to a new house? Luca asked. One with a big backyard and rooms just for you? Both children's eyes went wide. A new house? Marco asked. Just for us? Just for us, Elena confirmed. A place where we can plant gardens and have barbecues and maybe even get a dog. A dog? Mia's voice went up an octave. Really? Luca laughed. Really, but only if you promise to help take care of it. We promise. Both children shouted at once, then started chattering excitedly about what kind of dog they wanted and how big their new rooms would be and whether the backyard was big enough for a swimming pool. As Elena listened to their excited planning, she felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. This was what happiness felt like, not the desperate, fragile kind she'd clung to before, but the solid, steady kind that came from knowing you were exactly where you belonged. Mrs. Moretti? Signora Bianca approached with a soft smile. I've packed a picnic lunch. I thought perhaps the family would like to visit their new house this afternoon. Elena looked at the woman who had become like a mother to all of them. What about you? Will you come with us? Signora Bianca's eyes misted over. If you're sure you want an old woman cluttering up your new beginning. You're not old, Mia protested, and you make the best cookies in the world. We need you to come with us. The child has a point, Luca said seriously. Who else is going to teach Elena how to make proper Sunday gravy? Elena laughed, her heart full to overflowing. This was her family, complicated and unexpected and absolutely perfect. They'd found each other in a storm, but they'd built something beautiful in the calm that followed. As they loaded into the car for their first visit to the house on Maple Street, Elena caught Luca's eye in the rearview mirror. He winked at her, and she felt that familiar flutter of love and gratitude that still caught her by surprise sometimes. Are you ready for this? He asked softly. Elena looked at their children bouncing excitedly in the back seat, listened to Signora Bianca telling them stories about the neighborhood where she'd grown up, felt the warm weight of her wedding ring on her finger. I'm ready for everything, she said. And as they drove through the spring afternoon toward their new life, Elena knew with absolute certainty that the storm that had brought them together was the greatest blessing she'd ever received. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories began with the darkest nights. Sometimes saying yes to a stranger's kindness was the bravest thing you could do. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, the person who rescued you from the cold would turn out to be the one who taught you what warmth really meant. Elena reached over and took Luca's hand as they pulled into the driveway of their new home, ready to begin the next chapter of their impossible, improbable, absolutely perfect love story. The snow was finally gone, but they carried its lessons with them. That shelter could be found in unexpected places, that strangers could become family, and that love, when it was real and true and brave, could weather any storm.